David had always felt that life had something missing. For years, he had tried everything to start a family, hoping to hear the laughter of children fill his home, hoping to feel the warmth of a family that would make every day meaningful. But life had other plans. After years of medical treatments, consultations, and long discussions with doctors, David had come to a painful conclusion. He was infertile. That word, infertile, had hit him like a cold wind on a winter morning. It was not just about not being able to have children. It felt like the doors to a world he had always dreamed of had been closed forever. He tried to live a normal life, focusing on work, friends, and hobbies. But there was a quiet emptiness in his heart that refused to go away. One evening, after a long day at his small accounting job, David sat in his modest apartment, scrolling through property listings online. He was not looking for anything special, just something that might give his life a new sense of purpose. He had always loved nature. The idea of wide-open spaces, fresh air, and a life where he could feel connected to the earth. That was when his eyes landed on an unusual listing, a small ranch, not too far from the city, being sold for $1. At first, David thought it was a mistake. How could anyone sell a property for just $1? He read the description carefully. The ranch was old and neglected, the house in need of repairs, and the land overgrown. The previous owner had left suddenly, leaving behind some furniture and farming equipment. The listing warned that it would take a lot of work, and the new owner would have to handle everything themselves. David felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. This was not just a property, it was a challenge. It was a chance to start fresh, to escape the emptiness of his current life, and maybe, in some small way, to find meaning again. He spent the night researching, reading about the area, the climate, and stories of people who had taken on similar adventures. By the early morning, he had made his decision. He would buy the ranch. It was risky. It was unconventional. But something inside him told him that this was the change he needed. Within a few weeks, David had completed the purchase. The paperwork was simple, the price nearly symbolic, but the real work was about to begin. He packed his few belongings into his old pickup truck and drove to the ranch, feeling a mixture of hope and apprehension. The road leading to the property was narrow and winding, lined with tall trees that swayed gently in the breeze. When he finally arrived, the sight that greeted him was both breathtaking and daunting. The ranch was surrounded by fields of wild grass, with a small stable, a farmhouse that looked as though it had not been touched in years, and a quiet river flowing nearby. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of earth and growing plants. It was beautiful, but it also felt lonely. The kind of lonely that made David's heart ache, but in a way that also felt comforting. He was finally away from the noise of the city, away from reminders of what he had lost. David spent the first day exploring every corner of the property. The house was small but had a warm charm, with wooden beams, a fireplace, and large windows that let in sunlight. The stable, however, told a different story. It was old, with broken doors, and a roof that had leaks. Straw was scattered across the floor, and old tools lay in disarray. Yet, as David looked around, he noticed small signs of recent activity. A few pairs of shoes, a blanket, and some containers that seemed out of place. He paused for a moment, a shiver running down his spine. Was someone living here? The thought was unsettling, but there was no one in sight. David shook his head and told himself it was probably just leftovers from the previous owner. Over the next few days, David began cleaning and repairing the property. He fixed the broken doors of the stable, mended the fence, and cleared the overgrown fields. The work was hard, exhausting even, but it was satisfying in a way he had never experienced before. For the first time in years, he felt useful, capable, and alive. Each night, as he sat by the fireplace in the small farmhouse, he imagined what life could be like here. He imagined planting crops, raising animals, and maybe even one day welcoming children into this quiet, peaceful place. It was a dream he had long thought impossible, but now it felt within reach, even if only as a distant hope. Despite the progress, there were moments when David felt a creeping unease. Strange noises at night, the creaking of the stable, the rustling of leaves, faint footsteps, made him pause. He told himself it was probably the wind, or perhaps a wild animal. But the feeling that he was not entirely alone on the property lingered. He began to explore the stable more carefully, looking for clues. It was during one of these inspections that he noticed something unusual. Behind a stack of hay, partially hidden by old blankets, there was a small bundle of clothing. It looked recent, as though someone had been using it very recently. David's heart raced. Could someone really be hiding here? He felt a mix of fear and curiosity. That evening, David sat outside under the stars, trying to make sense of his thoughts. The ranch was beautiful, the night sky clear and filled with stars. The river reflected the moonlight, and the gentle sound of water flowing was calming. Yet, the thought of someone possibly living in the stable made him uneasy. He wondered who it could be, why they would hide, and whether he should investigate further. He knew that the life he had bought for $1 had become much more complicated than he had imagined. Over the following days, David's curiosity grew. He began leaving small offerings of food near the stable, hoping to signal to whoever was there that he meant no harm. He would speak softly, calling out occasionally, "Hello? Is anyone there?" At first, there was no response. But one morning, as he approached the stable with a basket of bread and fruit, he saw movement. A shadow darted behind the haystack. David froze, his heart pounding. Slowly, he called out, trying to sound calm and reassuring. The movement stopped, and for a few tense moments, there was silence. Then, a small, frightened voice whispered, "Please, don't hurt me." David's mind raced. He had expected anything, but not this. Someone was actually hiding in the stable. Someone in need of help. The realization hit him hard. The emptiness he had felt in his own life suddenly seemed connected to this moment. Here was someone who needed protection, someone vulnerable, someone who had come to the very place he had bought to find safety. Just as he had hoped to find purpose, he took a deep breath and spoke softly. "I won't hurt you. My name is David. You're safe here." The figure slowly emerged from the hay, revealing a young girl, her eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. She was thin, her clothes worn and dusty, and there was a weariness in her expression that spoke of hardship and escape. David felt a surge of compassion and concern. He knelt down to appear less threatening and continued speaking gently. "You don't have to be afraid. I can help you." "Are you hurt?" The girl hesitated, then shook her head slightly. It was clear she was wary, but also desperate for safety. That night, David set up a small corner in the stable with blankets, food, and water. He didn't know how long she had been hiding there, or what dangers she had faced to come to this place, but he knew that he had to protect her. As he watched over her that night, a sense of purpose began to take root in his heart. For years, he had felt incomplete, longing for family and connection. Now, unexpectedly, he had a chance to make a difference, to offer safety and care to someone in need. It was not the life he had planned, but it was a life that felt meaningful in a way he had never experienced before. Over the next few days, David focused on building trust. He spoke gently, offered small gestures of kindness, and slowly, the girl began to respond. She didn't speak much about herself at first, only hinting at hardships and the dangers she had faced. David listened without judgment, offering only reassurance and protection. He realized that the ranch, bought for a single dollar, had become more than a property. It had become a sanctuary, a place where hope could grow in the most unexpected ways. Even as he worked on repairing fences, clearing fields, and tending to the small garden he had started, David's thoughts often returned to the girl. He wondered how long she had been hiding, what her future might hold, and how he could ensure her safety. The emptiness he had carried for so long began to shift into a sense of responsibility and connection. He was no longer just a man searching for meaning. He was someone who had the power to change a life, to offer care and safety when it was desperately needed. By the end of the first month on the ranch, David had transformed both the property and himself. The house was livable, the stable cleaned and repaired, and the fields cleared enough to plant seeds. More importantly, he had formed a tentative bond with the girl, built on trust and mutual understanding. They were both cautious, both uncertain, but there was a sense of hope that had not existed before. David realized that life often gave unexpected opportunities for change. And sometimes, the smallest beginnings, like a ranch bought for $1, could lead to the most profound transformations. For David, the ranch was no longer just a property. It was a place where life, hope, and new beginnings could grow. And for the girl, it was a refuge from the dangers she had escaped, a place where she could find safety and care. Neither of them knew what the future would hold. But for the first time in a long while, they both felt that they were exactly where they needed to be. After the first month at the ranch, David had settled into a steady rhythm. Mornings were spent tending to the small garden he had started, repairing fences, and exploring the overgrown fields. Afternoons were for the animals in the stable, feeding the chickens, checking the horses, and clearing the straw. The ranch had slowly started to feel like home, a place where he could finally breathe and feel alive. But no matter how busy he kept himself, his thoughts often returned to the girl who had appeared in the stable that first evening. She had remained quiet, shy, and cautious, revealing little about herself. Yet there was an undeniable bond forming between them. The girl, whose name was Lila, had gradually begun to trust David. She still flinched when he raised his voice or moved too quickly. But she accepted the food and warm blankets he offered. And sometimes, she even allowed him to sit near her while she ate. David learned that Lila had fled a dangerous situation in her previous home. The details were sparse, but it was clear she had faced hardships no child should ever face. Each day, he saw the fear in her eyes begin to ease, replaced slowly with curiosity and a cautious hope. One morning, David decided to explore the back of the property more thoroughly. He had noticed a small stream running along the edge of the ranch, and he hoped it might be useful for irrigation or simply as a peaceful place to sit. As he walked along the path, he noticed footprints in the soft mud. They were small, delicate, and slightly muddy, showing that someone had recently been here. His heart skipped a beat, and he realized these must be Lila's. For the first time, he wondered how long she had really been hiding here, and what kind of life she had managed to survive in this lonely place. When he returned to the stable, he found Lila sitting quietly on the hay, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked up at him and smiled faintly, a gesture that seemed both cautious and brave. "Morning," she whispered. David smiled back, kneeling to be at eye level. "Good morning," he said gently. "Do you want to see the stream with me today?" Lila hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. David felt a surge of warmth in his chest. Trust, he realized, was fragile and precious, and every small step mattered. Walking together to the stream, David kept his tone light and calm, pointing out flowers, birds, and the way sunlight danced on the water. Lila listened and occasionally spoke, asking questions about the animals, the plants, and the work he did on the ranch. It was the first time she had spoken more than a few words in weeks. David noticed how sharp her mind was, how carefully she observed everything, and how quickly she learned from his explanations. By the time they returned to the stable, a small but meaningful connection had formed between them. Over the next few weeks, David continued to build a routine that included Lila in daily life. He gave her small tasks, gathering eggs, feeding the animals, and helping with planting seeds. At first, she was hesitant and clumsy, afraid of making mistakes. But David was patient, offering encouragement and praise whenever she succeeded. Slowly, her confidence grew. She began to smile more, laugh quietly, and even speak her thoughts aloud without fear. For David, this transformation was both heartwarming and bittersweet. He knew she had suffered deeply, and yet he was witnessing her rediscover hope and trust. One day, while David was repairing a fence near the edge of the property, Lila appeared carrying a small bundle of herbs she had picked. She had a shy smile on her face, and her hands trembled slightly as she handed them to him. "I thought these might help," she said softly. David accepted the herbs and examined them carefully. They were fresh and fragrant, perfect for tea or cooking. "These are wonderful," he replied, genuinely impressed. "Thank you, Lila." The small exchange, simple as it was, filled the air with a sense of warmth and connection. It was moments like these that made David feel that maybe, just maybe, life could offer second chances. Despite these small moments of peace, the underlying tension of their situation remained. David knew that Lila's presence at the ranch was temporary in the eyes of the law. He worried constantly about her safety, the right way to contact authorities, and how to ensure she received the help she needed. Yet, he also understood that rushing things could scare her and undo the fragile trust they had built. He decided to act slowly, giving her time to feel secure while discreetly preparing for the inevitable steps ahead. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the ranch, Lila approached David with a hesitant expression. "Can I ask you something?" she whispered. David looked at her with gentle eyes. "Of course," he said. Lila took a deep breath and spoke carefully. I'm pregnant," she admitted, her voice barely audible. David froze for a moment, trying to process the weight of her words. He had expected fear, uncertainty, or sadness. But this revelation carried a different kind of urgency. It was clear that Lila needed care, protection, and understanding more than he had ever imagined. David knelt beside her, his voice calm and steady. "Thank you for telling me," he said softly. "We will make sure you are safe, and we will take care of you. I promise." Lila looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. It was the first time she had truly allowed herself to show vulnerability. David felt a deep sense of responsibility settle over him. This was no longer just about offering temporary shelter. It was about ensuring that she and her child would survive, grow, and be protected. The next days were filled with preparation and careful planning. David knew that Lila would need medical attention, proper nutrition, and a safe environment. He began researching local clinics, doctors, and support services that could assist. He also took extra care to make the stable comfortable and secure, adding blankets, pillows, and small personal touches to make it feel more like a safe home. Lila watched as he worked tirelessly, and although she did not speak much, her eyes reflected gratitude and trust. As they settled into this new routine, their bond deepened. David shared stories from his childhood, his dreams, and his failures, offering Lila glimpses into his own life. In return, she began to share small pieces of her story, memories of her favorite foods, the games she liked to play, and the small joys she had once known before hardship took over. These exchanges, simple yet profound, created a connection neither of them had anticipated. They were two souls, both searching for safety, trust, and belonging, finding it in the most unexpected place, an old ranch bought for $1. One afternoon, David took Lila to a nearby town to purchase some supplies and clothing. It was a small adventure, but for Lila, it was a glimpse into a world she had not seen in months, perhaps years. She marveled at the shops, the colors, and the simple act of walking among people without fear. David kept a watchful eye, ensuring her comfort and safety, while encouraging small steps of confidence. The trip was brief, but it left a lasting impression on Lila. She began to understand that life could hold kindness, care, and moments of joy, even after so much suffering. Back at the ranch, evenings were spent quietly. They would sit by the fireplace, David reading aloud from old books he had collected, and Lila listening, occasionally asking questions or commenting softly. The stable, once a place of hiding and fear, had transformed into a sanctuary filled with warmth, light, and the faint promise of hope. David found himself thinking less about the emptiness he had once felt, replaced instead by a sense of purpose and connection. He realized that family was not only about biology, it was about care, trust, and the willingness to be there for someone in need. Despite these small victories, David knew that challenges lay ahead. The road to ensuring Lila's safety and well-being would not be easy. He would need to navigate legal matters, social services, and the complexities of caring for a young pregnant girl alone. Yet, he also knew that they had already overcome the first and most difficult obstacle: trust. Lila had chosen to reveal herself, to accept his help, and to take the first step towards safety. And in return, David had opened his heart, his home, and his life to someone who needed him as much as he needed a sense of purpose. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch began to feel more like a home for both of them. The garden grew, the animals thrived, and Lila's confidence slowly increased. She began to move more freely around the property, helping David with chores, tending the animals, and even planting small flowers along the paths. Each small success was celebrated with smiles, quiet laughter, and shared moments of satisfaction. For David, these moments were priceless. They represented growth, resilience, and the quiet joy of nurturing life. By the end of this part of their journey, David and Lila had formed a bond that went beyond mere survival. It was a bond built on trust, compassion, and the understanding that life could change in unexpected ways. The ranch, once abandoned and almost worthless, had become a place of refuge and hope, and for David, who had long believed that life's doors had closed on him, it had become a place where he could finally experience connection, purpose, and the possibility of family in a way he had never imagined. Life at the ranch was settling into a rhythm, but David knew that challenges were only beginning. Caring for Lila was no small task. She was young, vulnerable, and carrying a child, which meant she needed special attention, care, and support. David's days became longer and more exhausting, yet he never complained. Each morning, he woke early to tend to the animals in the fields, then checked on Lila to ensure she had eaten well and was comfortable. He learned to read her expressions, noticing when she was anxious, tired, or simply in need of reassurance. Lila's pregnancy added layers of concern. David had no experience with childbirth or prenatal care, but he did everything he could to educate himself. He read books about nutrition, health, and safety for young pregnant girls. He visited a nearby clinic discreetly, asking questions and arranging for medical checkups. Each visit required careful planning. He didn't want to frighten Lila or make her feel exposed, so he explained everything in small, gentle steps, always emphasizing that her safety and the baby's well-being were the most important things. Lila listened quietly, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just nodding. Gradually, she began to trust that David would protect her and help her through the uncertain journey ahead. At the same time, the isolation of the ranch made it difficult to maintain normal routines. The nearest town was miles away, and local neighbors were few and suspicious of outsiders. Word of a young girl living with a man on the property spread quickly. Some people whispered. Some openly questioned David's intentions, and a few even offered unsolicited advice or criticism. The situation was uncomfortable, and David felt the weight of judgment pressing down on him. He understood why people were curious or cautious, but he also knew that acting on rumors would only harm Lila and break the fragile trust she had built with him. One afternoon, a neighbor came by unexpectedly. He was an older man, with a weathered face and a stern demeanor. "I hear you've got a girl staying at your place," he said bluntly. David nodded, keeping his voice calm. "Yes, she's safe here. That's all I can say." The neighbor frowned. "People talk. You know. You better be careful." David nodded again, feeling a mix of frustration and worry. He didn't want trouble, but he also knew that he had to protect Lila at all costs. After the neighbor left, he checked on Lila, finding her quietly drawing in the dirt near the stable. She looked up and smiled faintly, and David felt a surge of resolve. He would face any challenge, endure any criticism, as long as she remained safe. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between David and Lila continued to grow. They spent mornings in the garden, afternoons repairing fences or cleaning the stable, and evenings near the fireplace, sharing stories and quiet moments. Lila had begun to relax more around him, sometimes laughing quietly when he made jokes, or sharing small stories from her past. David found himself learning patience, understanding, and empathy in ways he had never imagined. Caring for Lila was not just about responsibility, it was about connection, and he felt a deep satisfaction in seeing her grow stronger and more confident each day. Despite the peaceful moments, there were still dangers and uncertainties. Lila's past was a shadow that loomed over them. David often wondered if the people she had fled from were still looking for her. He worried about legal complications, especially concerning her age and her pregnancy. Social services were necessary, but approaching them required careful timing and preparation. He wanted to ensure Lila felt safe and involved in every step, rather than blindsided or frightened. It was a delicate balance, and David took it seriously. One afternoon, while David was tending to the chickens, Lila approached him with a worried expression. "David, do you think they will take me away?" she asked quietly. He paused, considering his words carefully. "I don't know what will happen exactly," he admitted, "but I do know this: you are not alone. Whatever comes, I will be here to help you, and we will face it together." Lila nodded slowly, clutching a small piece of cloth she had been sewing. I just want to be safe," she whispered. David knelt beside her, holding her hands gently. "And you are safe now," he reassured her. "No one can hurt you here." As the weeks passed, David arranged for regular medical checkups for Lila. She was nervous at first, worried that someone might question her or that the doctors would not understand her situation. David accompanied her to every appointment, speaking gently and encouraging her at every step. He learned from the doctors, asking questions about prenatal care, nutrition, and how to prepare for childbirth. Together, they created a routine that included healthy meals, rest periods, and gentle exercises to help Lila stay strong. Slowly, she began to relax, realizing that she was not only safe but supported in a way she had never experienced before. Meanwhile, David worked tirelessly on the ranch itself. The property needed constant attention. Fences had to be repaired, fields cleared, and animals cared for. He often worked late into the night, but the thought of providing a safe home for Lila kept him going. He was learning to live with a sense of purpose he had never known before. Each task completed, each small improvement to the ranch, felt like a step toward creating stability, a sense of home, and a future for both of them. One day, while tending the garden, David noticed Lila watching him quietly. She seemed hesitant, but then she spoke softly. "David, can I help plant some seeds?" He smiled warmly. "Of course," he said. Together, they worked side by side, planting vegetables and flowers. Lila's hands were small and careful, her movements deliberate. She asked questions, and David explained patiently, teaching her the names of the plants, how to care for them, and why each step mattered. By the end of the afternoon, they had created a small, thriving garden patch. Lila looked at it with pride, and David felt a deep satisfaction seeing her confidence grow. As the pregnancy progressed, David became increasingly attentive to Lila's physical and emotional needs. He learned to recognize signs of fatigue, discomfort, and stress. He prepared meals rich in nutrients, encouraged her to rest, and spent hours talking with her, offering reassurance and companionship. Lila, in turn, began to trust him fully, sharing memories, dreams, and fears. Their relationship had evolved beyond that of a caretaker and a child in need. It had become a partnership based on trust, respect, and mutual reliance. The ranch itself began to transform as well. The once abandoned property now felt alive, filled with the sounds of animals, the scent of fresh earth, and the quiet rhythm of daily life. David had repaired broken fences, cleaned the stable, and even started small repairs on the farmhouse. It was not perfect, but it was theirs. A safe haven built with hard work, patience, and care. Lila often helped, her small hands learning to mend fences, carry tools, and plant seeds. Each day brought a sense of accomplishment, a reminder that even the smallest efforts could create meaningful change. Despite the progress, there were moments of tension and uncertainty. Lila sometimes became frightened by unexpected noises or shadows, and David had to comfort her repeatedly. Neighbors continued to gossip, and David remained vigilant, knowing that protecting her meant more than just keeping her physically safe. He had to ensure she felt secure emotionally, mentally, and socially. It was exhausting work, but one that David embraced fully, understanding that true protection required more than just walls and fences. One late evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, David and Lila sat outside near the stream. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, and the gentle sound of water flowing created a peaceful atmosphere. Lila leaned against David, her small frame trembling slightly. "I'm scared," she admitted softly. David wrapped an arm around her shoulders, holding her close. "It's okay to be scared," he said gently. "We will face everything together. You are not alone anymore." She nodded, resting her head against him. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of calm, a feeling of safety she had long forgotten. Through all these challenges, David learned more about resilience, empathy, and the quiet strength of human connection. Lila had endured hardships that no child should face, yet she continued to grow, learn, and trust. David saw in her a spark of courage and determination, and he felt honored to be part of her journey. Their relationship, though unconventional, had become a source of strength for both of them. A reminder that hope could emerge even in the darkest of circumstances. As part 3 of their story closed, the ranch had become more than just a property or a project. It was a sanctuary. A place where lives were being rebuilt, where trust and care flourished, and where the impossible seemed possible. David and Lila faced challenges, uncertainty, and fear. Yet they also discovered courage, hope, and the deep bonds that could form between people who choose to care for one another. Their journey was far from over, but the foundation they had built on trust, love, and perseverance promised a future filled with possibility. As the days turned into weeks, the final months of Lila's pregnancy approached. David had become increasingly attentive, anticipating the needs and challenges that lay ahead. He carefully organized the house and stable to ensure that Lila would have a clean, safe, and comfortable space. Blankets were folded neatly, pillows fluffed, and warm water prepared for her daily needs. The garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables and herbs, and the animals were well fed and cared for. Every task David completed felt like a preparation for something bigger, a life that was about to change forever. Lila had grown stronger, both physically and emotionally. The fear that had once dominated her eyes had softened into cautious confidence. She moved more freely around the ranch, helping David with light chores, watering plants, and tending to the small animals. Sometimes, she would laugh softly at the playful antics of the chickens or the curious horse that followed her wherever she went. These small moments of joy reminded David why every sacrifice, every sleepless night, and every worry had been worth it. He felt a quiet pride in seeing her regain a sense of normalcy, even as their lives remained unconventional and unpredictable. Despite the growing peace at the ranch, the outside world still loomed. David knew that Lila's safety could not rely solely on isolation. Social services, legal matters, and medical care had to be addressed. One morning, he finally made the difficult decision to contact a local social worker, explaining the situation carefully and honestly. He emphasized that Lila was safe, well cared for, and that she needed support rather than punishment. The social worker listened attentively, asked questions, and arranged for periodic visits to ensure Lila's well-being. It was a step David had dreaded, fearing it might frighten her, but he understood that it was necessary for her long-term safety. When the social worker visited the ranch, Lila was nervous. She hid behind David at first, clutching his arm tightly. David knelt beside her, speaking softly. "It's okay, Lila. They are here to help us." not hurt us. Slowly, she allowed the social worker to speak with her, answering questions in small, careful words. The woman was kind, patient, and understanding, assuring Lila that her safety and happiness were the priority. After the visit, Lila looked up at David with a small smile. "They are nice," she whispered. David nodded, relief flooding through him. The first step toward proper support had been taken, and it had gone well. As the day of the baby's arrival drew closer, David became increasingly focused on preparation. He read books about childbirth, emergency procedures, and newborn care. He stocked up on supplies, blankets, baby clothes, and basic medical items. He even arranged a small room in the house where Lila could rest comfortably and the baby could be cared for after birth. Every decision he made was guided by love, caution, and determination. He wanted to ensure that when the moment arrived, everything would be ready. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Lila spoke quietly. "David, I'm scared about having the baby." David reached out and held her hands gently. "It's okay to be scared," he said softly. "I'm here, and we will face it together. You are not alone." Lila nodded, tears welling in her eyes. But there was also trust, a belief that David would be by her side no matter what. That night, as she slept peacefully under the warm blankets, David sat in the chair beside her bed, thinking about the journey they had shared. He reflected on the ranch's transformation, on Lila's growth, and on the unexpected twists of fate that had brought them together. What had begun as a lonely man buying a neglected ranch for $1 had grown into a life filled with responsibility, love, and hope. The day of labor arrived quietly, with the first rays of sunlight spilling across the ranch. David helped Lila to the small prepared room, offering calm words and reassurance. He had learned to read her signs, when to speak, when to stay silent, when to offer comfort with a gentle touch. Hours passed slowly. There were moments of worry, moments of fear, but David remained steadfast, encouraging Lila, helping her through each stage. The animals in the barn seemed to sense the importance of the day, remaining calm, their soft sounds providing a comforting background. Finally, after a long and exhausting process, the cries of a newborn baby filled the room. Lila's face lit up with relief and wonder, tears streaming down her cheeks. David held the baby carefully, marveling at the small, fragile life in his hands. The baby was healthy, strong, and perfect in every way. Lila reached out to touch the tiny hands, and for the first time in months, a full smile spread across her face. "He's beautiful," she whispered. David nodded, emotion choking his voice. In the days that followed, David and Lila settled into a new routine. The baby required constant attention, and David's days were filled with feeding, changing, and soothing the infant. Lila, despite her initial fear, embraced her new role with quiet strength, learning to care for the baby with David's guidance. They worked together seamlessly, forming a small but resilient family unit. The ranch, once quiet and lonely, was now filled with the sounds of life: baby coos, laughter, the rustle of animals, and the gentle hum of hope. Word of the baby's safe arrival spread slowly through the small local community. Some neighbors were curious, some skeptical, but most chose to respect the privacy and safety of the family. David had learned to navigate the balance between openness and caution, ensuring that Lila and the baby remained protected while gradually allowing the world to acknowledge their existence. Lila, too, began to venture outside with David's encouragement, visiting the small town for supplies or walks, slowly regaining confidence and trust in people beyond the ranch. Over time, the bond between David and Lila deepened into something extraordinary. It was a bond not defined by biology, but by care, trust, and shared experiences. David had become a protector, a mentor, and a father figure. Lila had become resilient, confident, and hopeful. Together, they created a life that was unconventional, yet filled with love and purpose. The ranch itself had transformed along with them. What had once been neglected and abandoned was now a vibrant, thriving home, full of life and promise. One sunny afternoon, David carried the baby to the garden while Lila tended to the vegetables. The gentle warmth of the sun, the sound of the river, and the peaceful surroundings created a sense of contentment. Lila smiled as she watched David rock the baby gently in his arms. "He's happy here," she said softly. David nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "Yes, he is. And so are we." It was a simple statement, but it carried the weight of their journey. The struggles, the trust, the courage, and the love that had brought them to this moment. The challenges were not entirely gone, but they were manageable. David had learned to navigate the complexities of caring for a young mother and her baby while maintaining a stable life on the ranch. Lila had regained confidence and independence, and the baby thrived under their combined care. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and judgment, but they had emerged stronger, united, and hopeful. The ranch had become more than just land or a property. It was a home, a sanctuary, and a symbol of resilience and second chances. As months passed, the small family settled into a routine filled with joy and purpose. The baby's laughter became a daily soundtrack. Lila's confidence grew, and David felt a deep sense of fulfillment he had never known. The ranch was no longer a lonely refuge bought for a single dollar. It was a thriving home, filled with love, care, and the quiet magic of unexpected miracles. Each day brought new lessons, new joys, and new moments of connection, reminding them both that life, even after hardship, could offer hope, growth, and happiness. By the end of the story, the ranch symbolized more than survival. It represented transformation, the power of trust, and the unexpected ways life could change. David, once a lonely man struggling with infertility, had discovered family in the most extraordinary way. Lila, once a frightened, vulnerable girl, had found safety, support, and a chance to embrace life again. And the baby, born into uncertainty, had found a home filled with love, protection, and hope. Together, they formed a family defined not by circumstance, but by care, courage, and the bonds they had chosen to create. In the quiet evenings, as the sun set over the fields and the gentle river flowed nearby, David would sit with Lila and the baby, watching the world around them. The ranch, once abandoned, now echoed with life, hope, and the promise of new beginnings. For both of them, life had been forever changed, not by wealth, status, or luck, but by the courage to care, the patience to trust, and the determination to create a home where love could grow.